Good afternoon. I'm Nigel Allinson from the University of Lincoln, and welcome to this next session of Lincoln Live. I know I'm about 2 minutes early, and I shall wait until I hear the big bells of our cathedral, which is next door to me. And I hope we're all safely enjoying the beautiful weather, which we can see through our windows, but not really allowed to go out into. So I've been at Lincoln for 8 years, and before that passed through quite a few other universities. My research has always involved images, video, and I think for the last 6 or 7 years I've been working on a problem to improve um, the treatment of cancer using proton beams, which have certain advantages over the traditional radiotherapy, which uses X-rays. So my bells are about to chime, so I will just wait till we hear the big bong, and then I'll know it's exactly 2 o'clock to make a start. But welcome to you all. Okay, so as I was saying, I'm Nigel Allinson. I'm a professor at the University of Lincoln, and in this next session of Lincoln Live, I want to talk about honest science and false science, because it's an important problem. It's a challenge for us as scientists and society, and it's quite pertinent at the moment as we go through the COVID-19 crisis. But I want to start with a quote, so I'll just read it. "The duty of the man who investigates the writings of scientists, if learning the truth is his goal, is to make himself an enemy of all that he reads, and attack it from every side. He should also suspect himself as he performs his critical examination of it, so that he may avoid falling into either prejudice or leniency." So the language in that quote may seem a little old-fashioned, but when was it written? 17th century, the beginning of the age of enlightenment, the time of Newton? No. It was written about 700 years before that, before the Enlightenment, by an Arab mathematician, astronomer, physicist called Alhazen. This was called the Islamic Golden Age of science and mathematics. He's also called the father of optics. And here is the crux of science, of honest science. To get the most certain of explanations, I won't say the truth, we need to be uncertain. We need to doubt, to question, to test. But we as humans, we love certainty. We feel that we need it to cope with the sometimes cruel world and our life within it. Populist politicians provide simple solutions to what are complex problems. Stop immigration and our country will be great again. Homeopaths claim that dilutions of 1 part in a million, I probably lost count, but there should be 10 millions, is going to cure all manner of diseases. And if we did that sort of dilution, they'd have one molecule of the original substance there, then the size of our bucket of water would have to be 300 million times bigger than the size of the Earth. So what is science? Well, science is both a body of knowledge and it's a process, it's a method. In school, perhaps we thought of science as a collection of isolated and static facts listed in our textbooks. But that's only a small part of the story of science. Just as important is a process of discovery that allows us to isolate and link together these facts into a coherent process of discovery. And it gives us a comprehensive understanding of the natural world. Oh dear, I've introduced another term, fact. Put simply, by fact, I mean knowledge through observation, empirical studies. An observation that has been repeatedly confirmed and for all practical purposes can be accepted as true. Truth in science is never final. What's accepted as a fact today might have to be modified tomorrow or even dispensed with. And again, there's uncertainty. Facts can be obvious. Everything falls towards the earth. Or they can be not so obvious. That in our own bodies, we have millions and millions of microorganisms, bacteria. In fact, we have so much microorganisms, there are about 10 million more cells in my body that really don't belong to me. But that's a fact. Anyway, from our observations, we form a hypothesis. It's a tentative statement. It says we try and find deductions that can be tested from our observations. If objects fall towards the earth, then it's likely that heavier objects fall faster. Certainly what the Greek philosopher Aristotle thought. But Galileo, it is said, went to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped two different sized spheres of metal, and they both fell at the same rate. So bang went that hypothesis. There's actually no historical evidence that Galileo actually carried out the experiment. But Aristotle didn't carry out experiments. In fact, the Greeks weren't very good at carrying out experiments. They argued for many, many years whether a bucket of water weighed more if they put fish in it. It may seem obvious to us that it does. It didn't to them, and they never did that simple experiment. Anyway, hypotheses are provisionally collaborated through careful and repeated observations. But there may be several observations, several explanations that can explain some observations. So which one do we accept? Well, the one that makes the fewest assumptions, the simplest. And this was an idea first expressed by William of Ockham, who was a 14th century English friar, and he said that entities should not be multiplied without necessity. This has become known as Occam's razor. So we take to be correct that explanation which makes the fewest assumptions. So we believe the Earth to be a sphere, but there are few people, in fact a growing number, who believe it to be flat. And they try to explain the phenomena that we see around us. The ship that sails into the distance disappears below the horizon. Now, if you have a sphere, that's obviously why. But if it's flat, oh no, it's light refraction, limiting resolution by our telescopes, all sorts of more and more elaborate explanations. And if they fail to convince us, then we can always fall back on a conspiracy. For some reason, the world governments, NASA, the great body of scientists have got together, for some reason never really explained, to have this hoax that the world is a sphere. But their explanation is not the simplest. It doesn't obey Occam's razor. And then we have scientific laws, such as Einstein's famous energy equals mass times the velocity of light squared. E equals mc squared. It's pithy, short, it's brilliant. So in 1904, at the age of 24, Einstein, who was then a patent clerk in Switzerland, developed that formula. And we know it to be a correct formula, a correct law, if you like, by repeated and observations. He changed the world. He brought together three quantities: energy, mass, the speed of light, and related them together, something which no one realized before. What did it do? Well, it did give us the atomic bomb. It gave us atomic energy as well. And by a more convoluted path, I make use of that relationship in how I treat cancer using proton beams. And on top of this hierarchy of objects, if you like, ideas that we have in science, we have the theory. A theory seeks to synthesize, bring together a body of knowledge, a body of evidence, something that we observe. It's grander, it produces testable statements, something which we can use to predict. And an important part of science is that we can predict. If this theory says something, then if we try something that's not been tried before, we can test it. We can see if it is predictable. If it fails, then we have to go back and modify the theory or find a new theory. So science has to be falsifiable, which was the concept that was introduced by the 20th century philosopher Karl Popper. But as Humpty Dumpty said in Alice Through the Looking Glass, when I use a word, I use it for what I want it to mean, neither more nor less. And that's true with theory, because in general conversation, theory means, well, it's just a theory. Well, theory says. We're implying, yeah, it's possible, could happen, but probably doesn't. So when the creationists and those that promote intelligent design dismiss Darwin's theory of evolution as a theory, they're being a bit unkind. All our research that we do doesn't exist until we publish it. And we publish it in what we call the open literature. So everybody can access it. Okay, you may have to pay, but that's changing. We're now making more and more accessible science papers, publications, which are free to see. And all our papers are peer-reviewed. Fellow experts in our field, who are anonymous, review our papers. They look at our experiments. They try and find fault. They try and find fault in our conclusions. So there we are again to my opening quote. We try and make ourselves an enemy of all that we read. Okay, no one's perfect. Neither are scientists. We're all human. We try to be objective and robust in what we do, but so few fail, either by omission or by design. In 1989, in the University of Utah, two chemists, Stanley Pons and Martin Frischmann, announced to the world that its energy problems were solved. They claimed to create a nuclear fusion on a tabletop by electrolyzing heavy water. By nuclear fusion, they got more heat out, they got more energy out of their system than they put in. The problem is, no one else was able to reproduce their experiment, and that was not through trying. Did they make mistakes in their original experiment? Or did they become followers of the proverb, well, when you're in a hole, dig a bigger one? Because they would not give up with they would not accept that there were problems with their experiment, with their conclusions. There came what the psychologist Lamarck called the true believer syndrome. So once you've seen something, you believe something, no amount of evidence will distract you from your original opinion. So, should we believe in science? First, a cautionary tale. Linus Pauling was awarded 2 Nobel Prizes, the highest accolade in science. One of only 4 people to attain 2 prizes, and one of only 2 people to get them in different fields. His first was on the nature of chemical bonds, and his second, a Nobel Peace Prize, for his activism against nuclear weapons. Later, Linus Pauling became convinced that large doses of vitamin C could cure the common cold, heart disease, even cancer. He amassed a lot of money and a lot of investment in his ideas, but all the independent reports could find no evidence. He could never accept it. He dismissed all these independent reports as fraud and deliberate misrepresentation. My moral is, an expert in one field is not an expert in any other. Okay, let's come right up to date. COVID-19 and how 5G mobile phone networks are somehow causing it or encouraging it. Let's see the supposed facts. Okay, in 1916 we start the emergence of radio waves. In 1918 there was the Spanish flu outbreak. Spain didn't actually have any public transmissions until 1923, and then you can ask, well, why Spain and not other countries? But no matter. 2003, 3G was introduced to the world, and we had the SARS virus outbreak. 2009, 4G was introduced to the world, and we had the swine flu epidemic. And now we have 5G and COVID-19. Pretty solid so far. Well, Wuhan, where it started in China, wasn't the first city in China even to have 5G networks. Beijing and Shanghai and others were much earlier. But anyway, these are fine details. Let's not bother with fine details. There's a Latin expression, post hoc ergo propter hoc, meaning after this, therefore because of this. This is the meaning behind the saying, correlation does not imply causation. Just because 2 events happen in sequence, it doesn't mean that the second event was caused by the first. It's a fallacy we all often fall into, all of us. And let's give an example of this. There's a very strong correlation between the rise in global temperatures and the fall in the number of pirates in the world. So, obvious, if we can only increase the number of pirates in the world, then the climate crisis will be vanished. Anyway, back to my COVID-19 and 5G. So, how could it happen? It's showing that correlation is a bit weak, and some of the evidence presented is a bit flaky. But how can radio waves affect our immune system? Okay, there's another theory that viruses are created by radio waves, but as is said, for explanations offered with no evidence, they can be dismissed with no evidence. So let's see how radio waves could affect our immune system. Radio waves are just part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic radiation. Visible light is part of that spectrum. At one end of that spectrum are the high energy radio waves, electromagnetic waves, X-rays, gamma rays. They have enough energy to break down some of the chemical bonds. We call them ionizing radiation. It's why we use them in radiotherapy in the treatment of cancer. And at the other end, we have radio waves. But their energy is so small, they cannot break bonds in the DNA. They can't cause any DNA to mutate. They can't change the cells. So there is no explanation of how very weak radio waves can somehow affect our immune system. And for all the challenges and for all the certainty, lack of certainty, I should say, and the lack of absolutes, because in science we say there are no absolutes, the constant criticism by others and by ourselves in what we do, I would argue that science and the scientific method provides us with the best route to knowledge and to the advancement of our species. The thing to watch out for fake science is if statements are made that are definite. There are no caveats. This happens, that happens. There's no supporting evidence. There's no regard for the work of others and what has gone before. It's a secret. You learn from your tweet or your Facebook message. This is an exclusive. Only you know about it. And I was told this by a friend of a friend of a friend from someone who works where? We can't get back to the source of it. That's how we spot fake science. So, I may have given the impression that I'm a scientist. I'm not. I'm an engineer. And as Einstein said, scientists investigate the natural world that already exists. And as engineers, create something that's never been. A much more demanding task. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, who is at risk of fake science? Well, Sophie, all of us really. Okay, the flat earthers aren't a serious problem. We can smile at them if you like. But those that propagate the idea that vaccines are dangerous, the anti-vaxxers. So from a single paper and a very small study that was incorrectly done and has been shown to be false, this whole movement has started. The uptake of vaccines, especially the MMR vaccine, has caused measles to erupt again across Europe. Measles was a common disease, a childhood disease, and we about eradicated it through mass vaccination. But now the vaccination rates have dropped, it has risen its head again, it causes physical deformities, it can cause death. So there are people seriously at risk from fake science. Okay, Nicola, asking about who we should believe in about COVID-19. So there's lots of conflicting scientific information and advice. Okay, it's a new disease. There's a lot we don't know about it. I think I'm very impressed generally by the scientific community, how it is pulled together. And for all the criticisms, some of them politically based, about how the Chinese responded, within 2 days after identifying a new virus, they got its genome, its DNA blueprint, published, openly published. So there has been a lot of scientific collaboration. How we respond to it comes out of sometimes the realm of science and comes into the realm of politics. Do we put the country in lockdown this week or next week? Do we balance this with economic needs, etc.? But who should we be listening to? Who are the experts? The experts really are those formal bodies, those structures on which we have trust. The World Health Organization, the NHS, the scientific bodies. That is where the evidence lies. And they will, because they're scientists, often say, well, we're not certain, we don't know, this is our best guess. Because that's what we think. We can only ever have our best guess. What do we do about the future? How do we regulate it to challenge fake science stories? We are in a new era. Some people call it the post-truth era. Because any of us, with social media, with the internet, can propagate our ideas unchallenged. We're all experts, if you like. And so there's no filtering. There's no publishing in its traditional sense, where articles are read by reviewers, pored over by editors, and no responsibility either. Social media are platforms. They take no responsibility as being a publisher. And maybe we should change that. Maybe we should look at making social media platforms have the responsibilities and the constraints which publishers do. And then we perhaps should educate people. We need, throughout education, to inspire people to be critical of what they read and what they see, to challenge, to be doubtful. There's no harm in being doubtful and being challenged and being uncertain. And not to accept everything, and not to accept things from so-called experts or influencers. I never quite worked out what they were. And then scientists themselves need to introduce their science more openly to the public. It is better to explain the science first before the false science news stories escape and spread than to come along afterwards and try and say, no, it isn't true. Because once you have a belief, it's very difficult to shake it. It's what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Okay, so hopefully I've given some ideas of what fake science is. And then there's a concern here Darren brings up about young people and the fact that they get their news, their information from social media, from the internet, and not from traditional newspapers or the BBC or wherever. And certainly all the surveys show that people in their teens and their 20s do get most of their news about the current affairs, about the world, through the internet. Interestingly, they still feel it's important to get news about the world. Interestingly also, they are more suspicious of their news sources than older generations. And a big survey that was published last year in the science journal Science was that older generations, middle-aged people, are 7 times more likely to share fake science stories, fake news stories, than younger people. So, okay, we should worry about the youth, but I have great feeling and hope for the youth. They're not as gullible as many of us assume. Let me look down the questions again. Okay, Hazel. Now what impact could a certain politician, I can't think who you mean, have when he calls genuine evidence fake news? Well, then we're out of my area. I should really only speak as a scientist and an engineer, because now we're getting into the world of politics. And my views on this certain politician, who, just for the sake of argument, we'll call Donald Trump, shall we? And maybe a bit personal, and they're not objective. But yes, it is a problem. It's a serious problem that to keep calling things to be fake to be untrue, to change from day to day. What's more concerning to me is why do so many people still follow it, still believe it? That I find more difficult to understand, and that's where we need to look and try and understand. I'm not being dictatorial, I'm not saying this is how it should be, this is what we should believe. We just need to make people generally more critical, more open to new ideas. That's what is important. I think, looking at my list, I think I've covered nearly everything that's been asked. Some repeat, some don't. So I hope it's been informative, enjoyable. I wish everyone to stay safe and stay sane. And just think twice when you read something. Read something that's exclusive to you. The world doesn't want you to know about this. The government doesn't want you to know about this. There's a big conspiracy theory. Just be careful, because sometimes we get things wrong and we believe things that are wrong, and those things can be bad for us. So thank you very much. Thank you.